31. I cheated before my Amish wedding. My wife learned from my sister. My sister Martha did not attend my wedding. She sent word through our youngest brother that her stomach was unwell, that she could not manage the ride from her house to ours. My mother accepted the excuse without question. My father said nothing. Rebecca, the woman I was about to marry, squeezed my hand and whispered that Martha would come around eventually. I stood at the front of our bishop's gathering room, 31 years old, wearing a new shirt my mother had sewn, and the only thought moving through my mind was not about the vows I was making. It was about the last thing Martha had said to me 6 days earlier, standing beside the woodpile behind our father's barn. She had looked at me with an expression I had never seen from her before, not anger exactly, but something heavier than anger. She said, "If you do not tell Rebecca before Thursday, Joseph, I will tell her myself." Thursday came and went. I said nothing, and Martha was not at the wedding. I need to go back further than that. I grew up in a settlement in northern Indiana, one of those communities where 3 or 4 extended families made up most of the church district. My father was a cabinet maker. My mother kept the house, the garden, and the 6 of us moving in the same direction. Martha was the closest to me in age, 11 months older, and for most of our childhood, she was the person I trusted more than anyone on earth. She knew when I had stolen an extra biscuit. She knew when I had skipped my evening prayers. She knew when I had borrowed our father's hand plane without asking, and I knew her secrets in return. We had an understanding. We did not report each other. That was the arrangement, and it held for over 20 years. When I was 28, our father began pressing me about marriage. In our district, a man past 25 without a wife attracted attention. People did not say it to your face, but the questions floated through Sunday dinners and quilting circles. My mother had already mentioned Rebecca Yoder twice, once casually, once less casually. Rebecca lived in a neighboring district about 4 miles east. She was 26, quiet, capable, and had a way of listening that made you feel like the only voice in the room. I had spoken to her 3 times at community gatherings. Each time, I walked away thinking about her more than I should have. My father arranged a meeting with her family. That is how it was done in our district. Not forced exactly, but guided. The families would agree that 2 young people should spend time together, and if neither objected, things moved forward. Rebecca did not object. Neither did I. By the autumn of that year, we had an understanding. Not an official engagement yet, but an understanding that the engagement would come after Christmas. During that autumn, I traveled to a furniture auction in Shipshewana with 2 men from a neighboring district. One of them, Amos Graber, had a cousin named Lydia who helped run a small dry goods shop near the auction grounds. She was not Amish. She had left her community 4 years earlier and lived English. Amos introduced us casually, and I thought nothing of it. The second time I saw Lydia was 3 weeks later. I had returned to Shipshewana alone to pick up a cabinet my father had purchased. The delivery was delayed. I had hours to wait. Lydia was working at the shop across the road. She offered me coffee and a place to sit. I will not describe what happened in detail, because the details are not what matter. What matters is that I stayed far longer than the coffee required. And what happened between Lydia and me that afternoon was something I had no right to allow. I was not yet officially engaged to Rebecca, but the understanding was firm. Our families had spoken. Rebecca had already begun preparing things for a home, and I betrayed that understanding in Lydia's back room while a cabinet sat uncollected across the road. I drove home that evening with my hands tight on the reins and a weight in my chest I had never experienced. It was not the weight of guilt, not yet. It was the weight of knowing that I had just divided my life into a before and an after, and that no amount of prayer or silence could undo the division. I told no one. The engagement with Rebecca was announced 2 weeks later. Her family came to our house. There was pie. There was laughter. My mother cried. Rebecca's hand was warm in mine, and her eyes carried such complete trust that I had to look away. Martha noticed. She always noticed when I looked away. That evening, after the families had separated and the house was quiet, Martha found me sitting on the porch. She sat beside me without speaking for a long time. Then she said, "You are not happy the way a man should be happy tonight." I told her I was tired. She did not believe me. Martha never believed the easy answer, but she did not push. Not that night. 3 weeks passed. The wedding was set for late February. My mother and Rebecca's mother were deep in preparations. Food, seating, the house cleaning, the new furniture for the room Rebecca and I would share. I threw myself into the work. I sanded tables. I painted walls. I carried benches. I told myself that the afternoon in Shipshewana was an aberration, a single failure that God would forgive if I never repeated it, and that Rebecca never needed to carry that weight. Martha came to help with preparations one Tuesday morning. She worked alongside Rebecca for hours, kneading bread, washing windows, folding linens. I watched them together and felt something cold settle in my stomach. These were the two women I loved most, standing side by side, and one of them did not know who I really was. That evening, Martha asked me to walk with her. We went down the lane toward the creek, the way we had walked hundreds of times as children. She was quiet for the first several minutes. Then she said, "Joseph, when you went to Shipshewana the second time, what happened?" I stopped walking. The air was sharp and still. I asked her what she meant. She said Amos Graber had mentioned to his wife that I had spent several hours at Lydia's shop, and Amos's wife had mentioned it to her sister, and her sister had mentioned it to Martha at a sewing circle. The information had traveled the way information always traveled in our world, quietly, through women's conversations, landing exactly where it could do the most damage. Martha said she had not told anyone else. She said the other women did not seem to think much of it. A man waiting at a shop was not unusual. But Martha knew me. She had seen my face the night of the engagement. She had watched me avoid Rebecca's eyes 3 times that week, and she was asking me directly. I denied it. I told Martha that I had waited for the cabinet, drunk coffee, and left. Nothing more. She studied my face the way she had studied it since we were children, and I saw the moment she decided not to believe me. Her jaw tightened. Her hands went still at her sides. She said, "All right, Joseph, if that is the truth, then I will not mention it again." She did not mention it for almost 5 weeks. During those weeks, I convinced myself that the danger had passed. Rebecca and I grew closer. We talked about the garden she wanted to plant. She described the curtains she would sew. She asked me once, shyly, whether I wanted a son or a daughter first. I said either would be a blessing. She smiled in a way that made me feel like the worst man alive and the luckiest man alive in the same breath. Then, 10 days before the wedding, Martha came to the house unexpectedly. She found me alone in the workshop. She closed the door behind her, and I knew immediately that the conversation from the creek had not ended. It had only been waiting. She told me she had spoken to Lydia. My chest went hollow. Martha explained that she had traveled to Shipshewana under the pretense of buying fabric. She had gone to the shop. She had introduced herself as my sister. And Lydia, who had no reason to lie and no understanding of what her honesty would cost, had confirmed what Martha already suspected. Martha was not cruel about it. That was almost worse. She did not scream. She did not call me names. She sat on my father's workbench and said, "You have 10 days, Joseph. Rebecca deserves to decide for herself whether she still wants this marriage. You tell her, or I will." I begged Martha to stay silent. I told her it had been one afternoon. I told her it would never happen again. I told her that confessing would destroy Rebecca, destroy the family's arrangement, humiliate our parents, and accomplish nothing except spreading pain. Martha listened to every argument. When I finished, she said something I have carried for decades. She said, "You are asking me to watch that woman stand beside you and make vows to a man she does not fully know. You are asking me to become part of the lie, and I will not do it." I asked her to give me time. She gave me until Thursday, 6 days before the wedding. Thursday arrived. I said nothing. I could not bring myself to watch Rebecca's face change. I could not bear to be the one who broke the trust she carried so openly. So I told myself that Martha was bluffing, that she loved me too much to cause that kind of destruction, that she would attend the wedding, hold her peace, and eventually the whole thing would fade into the past. Martha did not come to the wedding, and for 3 years I believed her absence was her compromise, that she had chosen to remove herself rather than destroy my marriage. I believed she had been angry but ultimately loyal. I interpreted her silence as painful, reluctant protection. I was wrong about what her silence meant. Rebecca and I built a life. We had a son the first year and a daughter the second. Rebecca was a good wife, steady, warm, attentive, faithful in every way I had failed to be. She managed the household with a quiet competence that made everything feel secure. I worked hard. I provided. I attended every service. I told myself that the life I was living was my repentance, that being a good husband now erased the man I had been before. Martha and I barely spoke during those years. At family gatherings, she was polite but distant. She held my children. She complimented Rebecca's cooking, but she never sat beside me. She never walked with me down the lane. The closeness we had shared since childhood was gone, replaced by something formal and careful, and I told myself that was the price of what I had done, not the loss of my sister's warmth, but the loss of her easy trust. In the 3rd year of my marriage, Rebecca began to change. It was subtle at first. She grew quieter. She stopped asking me about my day. She moved through the house with the same competence, but something behind her eyes had shifted. When I reached for her hand at night, she allowed it but did not reach back. I asked her several times if something was wrong. She always said she was tired. The children were young. The work was constant. I accepted those explanations because accepting them was easier than asking the real question. One evening in late autumn, I came inside from the barn and found Rebecca sitting at the kitchen table with nothing in front of her. No mending, no Bible, no bread dough, just her hands flat on the wood and her face turned toward the window. I sat across from her and waited. She said, "Joseph, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." My body knew before my mind did. My hands went cold. My throat tightened. I nodded. She said, "Did something happen in Shipshewana before we were married?" The room was completely silent. The children were asleep upstairs. The stove ticked. I could hear my own breathing. I asked her where she had heard that. She said, "Martha told me." The ground beneath my understanding collapsed. For 3 years I had believed Martha chose silence. I had believed her absence from the wedding was her act of reluctant mercy. Now I learned that Martha had kept her word, not on my timeline, but on her own. She had waited until the wedding was past, until the children were born, until Rebecca was established in the marriage and could hear the truth without it destroying her ability to function. And then, during a visit I had not known about, Martha had sat with my wife and told her everything. Martha had not betrayed me out of spite. She had waited because she believed Rebecca deserved the information, but also deserved stability when she received it. She had carried my secret for 3 years, not as loyalty to me, but as protection of Rebecca. Every polite greeting, every held baby, every compliment at the dinner table, Martha had been watching Rebecca, waiting for the moment when the truth would wound but not annihilate. I sat across from my wife, and I did not deny it. There was no point. Rebecca already knew. She had known for weeks. I could see that now. The quiet, the distance, the empty hands on the table. She had been sitting with this knowledge, turning it over, deciding what it meant and what she wanted to do with it. Rebecca did not yell. She did not weep. She asked me 3 questions. Was it once? Was it before the engagement was official? Did I ever see Lydia again? I answered honestly, once, just before, and no. She nodded slowly. Then she said, "I need you to leave this room." I slept in the workshop that night, and the next night, and 3 more nights after that. On the 6th morning, Rebecca met me at the workshop door. She was wearing her regular dress, her hair pinned beneath her cap, and she was holding our daughter against her shoulder. She said, "I have decided that I am going to stay in this marriage, not because I forgive you, not yet, maybe not for a long time, but because I made vows, and I have children, and I believe people can choose to rebuild what someone else damaged. But Joseph, you will never lie to me again, about anything, not even small things. That is the condition." I agreed. I would have agreed to anything. What followed was not healing. Not immediately. It was something harder than healing. It was the daily work of sitting across from a woman who knew exactly who I was, who I had been at my weakest, and choosing to remain anyway. Rebecca did not pretend. She did not perform forgiveness she did not feel. Some nights she was warm, some nights she turned away. Some mornings she looked at me with something close to love, and other mornings she looked at me with something I could not name but understood I had earned. I went to see Martha. I drove to her house on a Wednesday morning without telling anyone. She was hanging laundry when I arrived. She saw me and did not stop pinning shirts to the line. I stood in her yard and said, "You told her." Martha did not apologize. She said, "I told you I would." I said, "You waited 3 years." She finished pinning a sleeve and turned to face me. I waited until she was strong enough to hear it and still be standing. "You wanted me to protect your secret." I chose to protect her instead. I stood in that yard for a long time. The anger I expected to feel did not come. What came instead was a recognition I had been avoiding, that Martha had done the thing I should have done myself, and she had done it more carefully, more thoughtfully, and with more respect for Rebecca than I had shown on the day I broke faith. It took years. There is no other honest way to say it. It took years for Rebecca and me to build something that felt solid again. There were seasons when I believed we would make it, and seasons when I saw her looking out the window with that same empty expression and knew she was still carrying the weight of what I had done. But she stayed, and I stayed, and slowly, not perfectly, we built a marriage that was different from the one we had started with, less innocent, more honest, built on ground that had been broken and deliberately repaired. Martha and I found our way back to each other too, though the closeness was never quite the same. There was a respect between us now that had not existed before, a recognition that she had held a boundary I could not hold for myself. She had loved Rebecca enough to risk my anger, and she had loved me enough to wait until the truth would cause the least destruction. I did not fully understand that for a long time. I wanted her to have been cruel. I wanted her motives to be selfish. It would have been easier to be angry with her than to admit that she had been the bravest person in the room. My children are grown now. My son has his own family. My daughter married a man from a district in Ohio. Rebecca is beside me still, older, quieter, with hands that know every corner of our house. Some evenings we sit on the porch the way my parents used to sit, and the silence between us is not empty, it is full of everything we survived. I have never spoken about this publicly. I have never told my children. Rebecca and I agreed long ago that the failure was mine and the recovery was ours, and neither needed to be carried by anyone else. But I am telling it now because I think there is something worth saying about what honesty costs and what it saves. I cheated before my wedding. My wife learned from my sister, and the marriage that followed was not the one I imagined when I stood in that gathering room at 31 years old. It was harder. It was more fragile. It required more from both of us than either of us expected. But it was real. Every single day of it was real. Martha is 73 now. Last spring she sent Rebecca a package, a small quilt, hand-stitched, for our newest grandchild. Inside the fold there was a note in Martha's careful handwriting. It said only, "For the family that stayed together." Rebecca read it at the kitchen table, set it down beside her coffee, and looked at me with an expression I had waited 40 years to see. Not forgiveness exactly, but something past forgiveness. Something quieter, something that did not need a name.